Alrighty, if you have your Bibles, turn to Numbers 27. Numbers 27. And already just the scripture reference should alert you that this is not necessarily a well-worn passage. There's probably not a whole lot of deep creases in Numbers 27 in your Bible. It's not necessarily one of those places in the Bible we spend a whole ton of time at, although certainly we find ourselves there from time to time. Before we dig into the text, I want to kind of set the table by talking about something that probably doesn't surprise you at all, and that is my wife, Maggie, has a bit of a skill with asking for things boldly and getting what she asks for. We sometimes call talking to strangers about things that some of us more shy people in the family don't want to talk about. We talk about like playing the game. We're like, hey, you go play the game. You go grease the skids. You go tell them what we're looking for. And this has worked out splendidly in some interesting ways, some minor ways. But there was one story I was thinking about when I was getting ready for tonight. I was thinking about how we were in Red River, New Mexico, our favorite place on the planet, and we had bought some property there that we still own and intend at some point to put a cabin on sometime in the future. But we noticed when we were in town one time a very big, beautiful cabin that we had never noticed before. For one thing, it was on kind of the western part of town, which we don't necessarily go to a lot. And it was really way up high, and it was fairly new, but it was really big and beautiful, and it looked kind of like a mine shaft almost. It looked like a big old, like you would have like a mine. You kind of picture what you picture of like what kind of building would be on a mine. That's kind of what it looked like, but it was clearly a cabin. And so we drove up kind of closer to it to get a good look at it. It was a beautiful cabin. And Maggie's like, hey, I think there's someone there. Hey, you want me to go ask if we can look at the cabin? Which I'm like, that's an insane thing to do. If I had a cabin and someone came and was like, hey, can I just wander around inside your cabin? The answer would probably be no. But she's like, hey, let me go. And I can't even get an answer out. She's already halfway up the driveway. And next thing I know, a few minutes later, I am touring this very beautiful cabin. And the lady was so sweet that who was taking us around. She was actually from the Tulsa area. They had bought this land several years before. They were working for years to build this cabin. And they were sharing some very valuable information about what it's like to build in Red River. It can be a very challenging place to build in for a variety of reasons. For example, it's really hard to get subcontractors to actually show up, and it had been so difficult. She explained that her husband, who was actually, I think he was like a doctor, a lawyer or something in Tulsa, he had actually studied for and gotten his electrician's license in the state of New Mexico just so that he could actually put the stamp on the plans for the electricity stuff, because that's how hard it was to get an electrician to actually show up to work. So some valuable information that we learned, and it was all because I had a bride who was bold enough to ask. Put that aside for a minute. I want to read some names to you. These are all female names, although one of them doesn't seem like it. See if you've heard these names before. Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, Tirzah. Okay, if you have heard of those, these are 5 sisters, again, all women, and they are the daughters of a man named Zelophehad. They're from the tribe of Manasseh. But even if you've heard of them, you very likely have not heard a sermon that is directly about these people. And I will tell you that I have been to a lot of art galleries all over the world. Washington, D.C., New York City, the National Gallery in London. I've been to some beautiful Caravaggios that depict all kinds of Bible scenes. I have never seen Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah in any of those paintings. I've been to some beautiful churches that had some beautiful stained glass. I've been to St. Peter's in Rome. I've been to St. Paul's in London. I've been to some awesome, awesome churches. I have never seen stained glass windows with Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They're not showing up there. And if you've never heard of those people, they are tucked right here into the book of Numbers, which is itself one of the least read books in the Bible, which is quite an achievement in obscurity. And yet, these 5 women did, in a single conversation, on a single afternoon, in front of the most powerful gathering in Israel, change the law for the entire nation of Israel. They changed the law. And not just for themselves, for every generation that came after them. They did so by, are you ready for this? Asking. Just for asking. Now, let me set the scene because the context always matters, but it matters enormously here. Israel has been in the wilderness for that whole generation, for 40 years. That generation that left Egypt, that generation that built the golden calf, that sent the faithless spies into Canaan, that grumbled and rebelled and tested God at every turn. That whole generation is, at this point, finally gone. Moses is about to die. The promised land is within reach. And the machinery of distribution for the promised land is whirring to life. What do you do once we actually have this land? You have to receive different portions of inheritance. How are you going to divvy all that up? And so you have these promises that were made to Abraham all those centuries before. Now we hear on this moment. This is the moment that everything's been building towards. We got to figure all this out. All of the years of wandering, all of the very wonderful manna and the water from the rocks and the sandals that don't wear out, and all of that pointed to this moment. You know, the land and the inheritance and the promise kept. And you have the distribution, and the distribution is going to be to the men. That's just how it was. We're going to divvy it up. How do we divvy it up? We do it by the men. You have father to son, generation to generation, and you're going to have to keep each family's portion in the family. And how are you going to decide that? You're going to decide that through the sons. All that's going to be decided through the sons. And I want to say that that is not particularly that unusual in the ancient Near East. That was pretty much every single culture was patriarchal, and that was pretty common, really all the way up even into modern times. Not that unusual. Now here's the problem. You have one individual, his name is Zelophehad, and he is dead. And actually he died in the wilderness, and the text is very careful to note that he did not die in that famous rebellion of Korah and his family and his rebels. He died for his own sin. It was not in an organized rebellion against God. He was an ordinary Israelite man who died before reaching the promised land. And he died, get this, without any sons. Now, what do you do if you're one of the daughters? We're divvying up all the land, and you're like, well, you skipped me. Well, we skipped you because you have no brothers. This goes from father to son, and father to son, and father to son, and so on. And so we have a bit of a problem because under the current system, this family gets nothing. And maybe even worse than that, not only does the family get nothing, the family name basically disappears. The family name goes through the sons, and so his name disappears. And so his daughters, who've been walking through this wilderness the same as everyone else, who've been waiting, who have the same claim on the promise, are going to receive no portion of land that their grandfather's grandfather was promised. That's just how it works. Now, most people in their position, I would argue, would accept that. Most people would have probably grieved it quietly, or let's be really honest, complained to one another about this behind closed doors, and ultimately concluded the system is broken, the system stinks. We got no legal standing. We got no advocate. I can't go to an attorney's office. I've got no precedent. There's nothing in Israelite law that's on our side. There's no law that would have been known. There was nothing to do. And so what do? When you have no law, when you have no precedent, well, you got to make precedent. Let's look at the text. Numbers chapter 27, look at verse 1 and verse 2. The daughters of Zelophehad, son of Heifer, by the way, some really great names in here if you're looking for a name for your child. The son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh. Finally, we get to Manasseh. Belonged to the clans of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They came forward and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders of the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and said, ... Hold right there. Now, don't just glossy eye over this because it's in the book of Numbers. I want you to notice the detail of what just happened here. They come forward, they stood up, and notice who's here. Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, the whole assembly, and notice where they are. They are at the entrance of the tent of meeting. These women boldly walk up to the most public, most sacred, most powerful venue available in all of Israel. They are at the entrance to the tent of meeting, a.k.a. where God hangs out. And they are going to speak together as one voice. They're going to make their case out loud in front of all the leaders who are standing there, in front of all of the witnesses who are listening. I want you to notice the boldness of this, because in that culture, women had no legal voice in inheritance matters. You're not needed here. You have no relevancy here at all. And by the way, they are in front of a crowd that had very likely never seen anything like this. You've never seen 5 bold women walk up with one voice before. And they have no guarantees except for the legitimacy of their grievance, I would argue, because it is a legitimate grievance. And I guess the only other thing they've got is courage. That's it. There's no guarantees here. And here's what they said. Verse 3. Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from this clan? Because he had no son. Give us property among our father's relatives. A subtle but very powerful and interesting detail here that I want you to notice is who they are arguing for per se. They are not arguing for themselves, per se. They're arguing for their father. Why should our, verse 4, father's name disappear? And the solution to that happens to involve them getting the property, but what they're really arguing for is the name of their father. Why should a man who walks faithfully through the wilderness, why should a man who was not a rebel, why should a man who simply had daughters instead of sons, right, David Bridgewater? Why should his family line end there at the edge of the promised land? And so they did their homework. They came prepared. They knew, by the way, of one of the possible arguments, one of the disqualifiers. Oh, remember that whole Korah rebellion? When Korah and his clan were all upset because, Moses' power has gone to his head, and they tried to take over, and the earth swallowed them up. They weren't a part of any of that, so you can't say, that he was involved in that. He explicitly wasn't. And so they constructed this very clean, very tight, emotionally resonant argument, and they delivered it right in the room, right in the right moment to the right people. And there are 5 women who have no legal standing, no precedent, no guarantee, standing up anyway. Now, watch what happens. Verse 5. So Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord said to him, what Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives, and give their father's inheritance to them. So we have God having Moses delivered the case, God answering immediate and unambiguously, and I think slightly surprisingly, hey, what they're saying is right. It's valid. It's a valid point. Let's do what they're wanting. And I think that's just powerful, because what he doesn't say is this. God doesn't say, okay, let's make this one exception. Let's bend the rules just for them. He doesn't say, well, given these particular set of circumstances, but we're not setting any precedents here. He's not even saying, this is a hard case and I'll show mercy. He's like, no, they're actually right. That's how it should be set up. Right. The word is right. He says, what they are saying is right. Who said that? The Lord said that. What they're saying is right. What they're saying is correct. It's just. It's true. And then God does something remarkable. He doesn't just rule in their favor. He rewrites the law. Look at verse 8. Say to the Israelites. All right, here we go. New plan. If a man dies and leaves no son, give his inheritance to his daughter. Well, if he's got no daughter. Well, if he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan that he may possess it. We probably could have just gone straight to that. But this is to have the force of the law for the Israelites as the Lord commanded Moses. So now we have a permanent change in the law, in the legal code for an entire nation. This is like Supreme Court level ruling. Like for everybody, for all time, this is how it's going to be going forward. And the word that God uses for what they received is mishpat. It is the word justice. He looks at the existing law, he looks at these 5 women, and God says the law is incomplete. Not that it's wrong, it's just incomplete. And it needs to be complete, and they need justice, and so let's give them justice. Let's fix it. And so 5 women changed the inheritance law of Israel, and they did it by walking into a room and asking, hey, can I see your cabin? It's just so cool to me that, again, the thing that I've noticed every step along the way as we've looked at these more obscure characters is the humanity of this. It is 5 women who get together and decide, really there should be a different way that we go about this. Let's go speak as one voice. And they do it by walking in a room and asking they get that justice. And the thing about it is there are so many excuses that we sometimes have when we run up to similar situations where we're like, I know how this should be and it's not. And we'll hear things like, well, that's just how it is. That's just how it is. That's how it's always been. That's just how we've always done it. We've always done it that way. That's how things work. Don't you understand? Or even worse, hey, listen, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat. Or you're not an exception. Or, hey, that's just reality. And technically, at all times, we are all living in between the current reality and another possible reality. At any given time, yes, this is reality now, but there's also a possible reality around the corner that we could be shooting for. And every once in a while, what happens is someone closes that gap between the current reality and what might be a different reality by just standing in the gap and asking. Just not assuming that this is how it has to be. And so kind of the question I want to throw at you tonight is, what situation are you currently accepting as fixed that, hey, it might not be? It might not be so fixed. Now, what I want to be careful here, and by the way, I don't like it when preachers give a lot of disclaimers to a point, and so I don't want to be one of those guys that wants to water down my point by giving you nothing but disclaimers, but I do want to give you some disclaimers. It goes without saying that I'm not talking about rebellion for its own sake, because there are some people who are just obsessed with always rocking the boat for no really good reason. I would look at this text and say, do you feel that the daughters of Zelophehad, do you feel like these daughters were rabble-rousers or troublemakers? I don't see that in the text. So we're not talking about that. I don't see them like, let's tear down the system, down to the man. Like, I don't see that. They were going through the proper channels. They were appealing to the values the system was supposed to embody, but wasn't. Which is so important. Because we live in a culture that is constantly talking about values. Your company that you work for likely has somewhere in writing the values. And it is not unusual at all for nobody to be filtering actual decisions through those values. And so how powerful is it to just look at, say, these are the values that we have, that we say we have, but I see a gap here. I'm just wanting to point out that we kind of are living in this gap between what we're saying we value and what is maybe actually true. I just love that these sisters believed in the promise. They believed that, hey, listen, Daddy's name needs to be preserved. Like, that's a part of this. They believed that a God who made a covenant with Abraham had not intended for faithful families to be erased on a technicality. And they said so. They had a legitimate grievance. They constructed a very thoughtful argument. They chose the right moment and the right value or the right venue, and they show up. So, I don't know what might the answer be for you for this. For a lot of us, it might be a work situation. Maybe it is a policy that creates genuine harm, and no one's actually really ever formally raised it as an issue that actually causes harm, does more harm than good. Maybe it's something in your family. Maybe it's a pattern that keeps repeating itself because everyone just says, hey, we've just agreed not to change this. As our family is yellers. We come from a long line of yellers. Maybe you're like, well, wait a minute. Or maybe it's something in this church, a gap between what we say believe and how we actually function. You've been noticing it for months, and maybe you've been telling yourself, it's not my place to say anything. Or maybe it's something that affects you directly, a situation that you've been absorbing some cost that isn't yours to bear, and the reason you haven't said anything is because you've decided the system is the system, there's nothing to be done. The daughters of Zelophehad had more reasons to stay quiet than you do, because they were women with no legal standing, with no precedent, no advocate, a culture that said women should have nothing to say here, and they walked into the room anyway, and they got the law changed. Now, I do want to end with this. I'm not saying every law will change. I'm not saying that something actually will move when you speak up. Sometimes the room doesn't respond the way God responded to Moses when you speak up. The daughters of Zelophehad's story is not a promise that, hey, if you ask, you'll always get a yes. But here's what I will say. Almost certainly you won't get it if you don't ask. Every law that was ever changed, every policy that was ever reformed, every pattern that was ever broken, it started with someone who decided the gap between what is and what should be was worth at least asking about. Their father's name was Zelophehad. It survived because 5 women refused to let it disappear. And they didn't have power or precedent. They had a legitimate grievance, 5 voices, and the courage to stand up. And God said, they're right. Go ahead and write that down.